Welcome, traveler. Please pull up a seat. Today's volume is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. So for several years, I struggled to find a modern fantasy that truly captured what I love about the genre. I started out in fantasy reading Lord of the Rings, like a lot of people do, and then I read the entire Pern series and was a huge, huge fan of that. And really, those books and Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons, not the books, just the game, and Magic the Gathering were things that all drew me into fantasy, Diablo 2, across multiple mediums. And consistently, I liked the same things about each one. After Pern, I shifted more towards reading pretty much purely science fiction and sort of faded out of fantasy for a while. And when I tried to get back into it, I struggled to find something that would really pull me back in. I would read a book and it just, I'd read partway through it and it just was not working. I know I like the genre, but I couldn't get something that really pulled me in. And then I picked up The Way of Kings. I had read Mistborn. It was okay. But Brandon Sanderson was talking about The Way of Kings. He seemed very excited about it. I'm like, you know what? Mistborn was all right. I'm going to try out The Way of Kings just because at least I finished Mistborn. And it wasn't just another enjoyable fantasy novel. It reminded me of why I fell in love with fantasy in the first place. It wasn't a Mistborn where I read it and it was fine. It pulled me back into the genre. It was the single book that did it. And while I now think there are books that I enjoy even more than The Way of Kings, The Way of Kings was exactly the novel I needed when I found it. We start off the story with Kaladin, and Kaladin is one of the main reasons that The Way of Kings works the way that it does. The Way of Kings is not plot-centric at all, which I think is great. I love a good fantasy plot, but I think the first book in a series needs to kind of bring you into it, and then the plot can start more later on. And The Way of Kings introduces you to Kaladin. When you meet Kaladin, he's already broken. He's not this naive character who lives on a farm. He's a broken man who's already been in the military. He knows how to fight, but he's depressed. He's barely functional as a person in a lot of ways. He's a slave in a slave wagon, being transported across Roshar to a place called the Shattered Plains, which is a big flat area that is essentially built on a bunch of plateaus, and they're fighting this race called the Pershindi, and they've been doing it since, like, forever, basically. And the slaves are brought in from across the realm, and they're sent there, and they're sold into bridge teams. And what bridge teams do is they pick up literally a bridge, a big wooden bridge, and they carry it and they put it down between the big plateaus, and the army goes across, and then they pick it up and they carry it and they put it down and the army goes across. Wash, rinse, repeat till they get to the front line where they're going to fight, and then a bunch of them die. They're horribly abused, they're poorly fed, mistreated in every conceivable way. And Kaladin's growth works because it's not about himself. It's not about escaping. It's not about becoming the chosen one. It's about him giving everybody around him, even though he is in the depths of despair, so significant that there's a point where he contemplates ending everything. He begins to give everybody around him reasons to hope. And that transformation is gradual, not sudden. It's something that takes a while to happen. This is a 1,000-page book, and believe me, it takes a big chunk of that book for this to start happening and for his growth to complete, his character arc for that book. And the great thing is, his depression is not resolved. You know, in a lot of books, depression is a thing that's used for a couple chapters and then, oh, I'm fine. That's not how this works at all. Kaladin's depression does not go away because someone gives him a speech, does not go away at all by the end of the book. It is something he is constantly realistically struggling with, and it really pulls you into the character because he seems like a very real person. And one of the greatest strengths of the novel is how it treats characters. Bridge 4 is the bridge team that he gets sold into. It's initially anonymous prisoners. They're disposable. You know, they're expected to die. But by the end, each member of the team has a personality. You care whether they live or die. And Sanderson earns the emotional investment through dozens of small interactions instead of some big dramatic speeches or other such typical fantasy heroism. They train together. Kaladin decides that he has to save these people. So he starts training them. He gets them to share their food. They start carrying bridges together, not just when they have to, but as a means of training. They don't just carry the bridge. They work as a team. They learn each other's names, which is something they hadn't done before, and they start joking despite being in these horrible situations. And they begin making friendships, and those friendships and these relations between the different characters and the relationship to Kaladin makes everything that happens later more satisfying. In contrast, you have Dalinar. Dalinar is the total opposite. Dalinar is not a broken man. He is not depressed. He is where Kaladin is weak and at the bottom rung of society. Dalinar is at the top, and he's strong and he's powerful. But these aren't what's compelling about him. He's not a typical strong, powerful, honorable character in fantasy. There's more to him than that, and there's a lot hinted at that you don't see happen yet in The Way of Kings, but complicates the character and certainly unfolds in later books. But he's compelling because in a world that sees honor as weakness, Dalinar refuses to abandon honor. He's under a lot of political pressure. He questions his own sanity at times, but he always chooses integrity over every other option. And we have Shallan. I like Shallan more, I think, in The Way of Kings than I do in a lot of the other books. But the thing that Shallan really helps the book do is slow down at times, because you switch to her and it's not about Bridge 4. It's not about the fights that they're in. It becomes about this girl who is setting out into the world. She's kind of got some of the things that Kaladin doesn't. Where Kaladin wasn't naive, she is. Where Kaladin wasn't inexperienced, she is. And she goes out and she starts investigating some stuff, which I can't go into here for spoiler reasons. She starts investigating and learning, and you learn a lot about the world at large through her. Because with Kaladin and Dalinar, you're dealing with the Shattered Plains, and you're dealing with the culture of one kingdom. With Shallan, you begin to learn a lot more about the rest of Roshar. And everything about this world takes time. It's introduced gradually and naturally. There's no moments of just pure lore dump that a lot of modern fantasy books do, where they just dump on your head, okay, here's the setting, here's the history of all this stuff. Sanderson gives this all to you in bits and pieces and in natural ways through interactions, through character development, rather than dumping it on your head. The history, the magic, the religion, the kingdoms, none of it is just dumped. And it makes the world so much more lived in and so much more believable to discover these things in natural ways. And this is something authors should pay attention to. If you're a developing author, if you are new to writing, pay attention to this kind of thing, especially in fantasy. The more naturally you can introduce parts of your world, its magic, its history, and so on, and always leave some stuff out. Always leave room for mystery, but taking its time, let it develop, let it come into the world naturally, let the reader come into the world naturally, and it'll stick with them. They'll fall in love with the world rather than having the world shoved into their face. The reader discovers Roshar at the same pace the characters do. You discover high storms, you discover sprints, soul casting, shard blades, foreign culture, all as people are exposed to it. High storms are a natural part of the world that everybody has always dealt with, but you aren't told about one until it shows up, and then you start to learn more and more about it. Spren are a natural part of the world, but they're more powerful components, or more powerful versions that show up as a result of magic returning to the world. You learn with and through the character. Nothing's dumped into your lap. Nothing is forced into your brain. It makes the setting feel lived in. It makes it feel natural. It makes it feel compelling rather than like a construct. I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of exposition, of course, but lore dumps always pull you just completely out of the book. So the magic system is one of the things I really love about The Way of Kings. Sanderson always creates hard magic systems in every book. And one of the weaknesses of Mistborn for me was that he would formulaically, kind of in a textbook style, like give you, this is how the magic works. This, if they do this, then this happens. If they do this, then this happens. If they do this, then this happens. There's a big weakness of Mistborn for me, which might be a little controversial to say to some people, But it's one of the weaknesses of Mistborn is the way the magic is introduced. And it's the weakness of a lot of modern fantasy books where they'll make a hard magic system and then it's presented to you in like textbook format. In The Way of Kings, the magic has understandable rules, limitations, and consequences, but it's slowly revealed in the most natural way possible. Yes, there's a little bit of exposition, but mostly it is the characters learning and discovering this, because there's no Gandalf. There's no guy that knows how everything works. They all have to discover this over time. And by making them discover the magic over time, he makes you discover the magic bit by bit over time. You discover its rules, you discover its limitations and its consequences as the characters do. You find out they can use Stormlight very naturally, because it's not just, oh, they can use Stormlight, and if you use Stormlight, you can do this, and if you do this, you can do this. Paladin pulls in Stormlight sort of naturally without being aware that he's doing it, and it allows him to do certain things that help him save Bridge 4. And it takes a while for him to start understanding what is going on. And, you discover Surge Binding and Shard Plate and Shard Blades and the Knight's Radiant all gradually over time. Some of this takes multiple books to unfold. But by doing this, by using the magic to create mystery before an explanation, and by never having those moments where the character just sits down with another character or sits down with themselves and is like, well, if you do this, then this happens, and so on and so forth, textbook style, it really brings a sense of wonder and fantasy to the magic system, rather than making it feel like, oh yeah, this is the magic system, this is how it works, this is the textbook on how everything happens. It reminds me a little bit of Ascendant. Ascendant does the same thing. I don't think it does it as masterfully as The Way of Kings, but it does do the same thing, where magic is not textbook given to you, for the most part. Doing that brings the reader into it. It certainly brought me into it, where I was like, this is awesome. This is way better than Mistborn, where they're like, well, if you eat this metal, then this happens, and you can do these things. But if you eat this metal, then this happens, and then you can do this thing. But if you eat this metal, then you can do this thing. It was all very dry to me, whereas The Way of Kings, it's very, very well introduced naturally to the characters and through the characters to the reader. For me, fantasy has been missing this. It's been missing that. It's been missing worlds that feel lived in. It's been missing hope, because everything is so dark now. Everything's trying to be George R. R. Martin on steroids. It gives you characters that are worth following. It gives you gradual immersion. These things are hard to find now, and The Way of Kings has all of them in abundance. Instead of overwhelming action, the novel invites you to live inside Roshar. You begin to care about ordinary moments. And by the time massive battles start happening, by the time the major fights unfold, you know what is at stake. And the slower pacing has made you care for what happens. And you don't even, keep in mind, this is part of the Stormlight Archive. This is part of I think it's 5 books now. You don't even really know the plot in The Way of Kings. It gives you that much time to get with the characters and care about what they're doing and what is going on with them, so that you care not about, okay, how do they defeat the bad guy? You care about what happens to the character. Are they going to make it through? How are they going to make it through? If they make it through, are they going to be okay? One of the great things Sanderson does with the magic system in The Way of Kings is that the magic system is tied directly to the emotional development of the character it is attached to. To become more powerful in the magic, you have to confront truths about yourself and about your emotions. Kaladin has to wrestle with his depression. The magic system does not allow him to wallow in his depression, but he has to fight it. He has to wrestle with it. He has to come to understand its origins, where it comes from, how to try to get over it in ways that are extraordinarily well written and natural to the way people typically deal with depression. And just a little spoiler, he's not done at the end of The Way of Kings. He's not just like over his depression. Now, I will say, to me, it goes too far in the Stormlight Archive as a series. In The Way of Kings, I think it's handled really well. But for me personally, there becomes a point where I'm like, okay, I'm ready for you to be through this, because we've been fighting it for 5 books or 4 books. But that's a weakness of the series, not a weakness of The Way of Kings. Sanderson's greatest weakness shows in this book as much as it does in any of his other books. I don't think Brandon Sanderson is a beautiful prose stylist. His prose is clean, it's efficient, it's clear, but it's rarely poetic. If you compare him to a Tad Williams, a Tolkien, a Guy Gabriel Kay, he does not have that type of writing. But it doesn't make The Way of Kings or anything else that he writes bad. It's just, if you're looking for that kind of prose, you're not going to find it here. His prose doesn't get in the way, but it never elevates anything either. It's designed, by his own admission, to disappear, which is great in a sense because the accessibility introduces countless readers to epic fantasy. For some people, really elevated prose can be kind of hard to read. This lets you connect with the book and focus on its contents rather than on its prose. But after a point, you're ready for more Sanderson's able to give you in the prose department. But for many readers, it's exactly what they need. And for me, trying to get into The Way of Kings, or back into fantasy, it was what I needed to at the time. Now, as far as the rest of the Stormlight Archive, the later books become longer, they become more uneven, they're occasionally repetitive. There's a lot of pacing issues that develop, especially as you go past the third book. And you can debate the merits of the plot as well. I think the plot's kind of weak, personally. But none of that changes how excellent The Way of Kings is. The Way of Kings stands remarkably well as its own book. And it was always meant to. He will tell you that. And I think it's important for fantasy authors or for new authors to try to write a book that stands on its own. And you're not going to be able to do that with every book in a series, but the first book in any series should be able to stand on its own. Whether it resolves the entire plot or not, of course, is a different story, but it should be self-contained and stand on its own. And The Way of Kings does that. The Way of Kings is an excellent book. The Dragon Boat Chair showed me that kind of fantasy that I want to write still exists. The Way of Kings reminded me of why I wanted to write fantasy in the first place. If you enjoy long-form character development, want an enormous world that is gradually revealed to you in natural ways, appreciate structured, hard magic systems that are interwoven into the characters and the setting as much as anything else, and aren't just kind of tacked onto everything. And if you appreciate and are willing to invest in a slower beginning for a powerful payoff, you should read The Way of Kings. Some books entertain us for a season. Others quietly remind us why we entered the library in the first place. The Way of Kings was one of those books for me. We're going to put this book into the collection, and I will see you next time you come around.